Imagine a metropolis of impossibly high walls, a jewel set deep within the Jordan Valley. Every artery of this sprawling city pulsed with extravagant life. They possessed an excess of everything: terraced gardens, trade routes paved in gold, and a lawless liberty to indulge their deepest desires. Their soil drank from the river and yielded such fruit that the land itself appeared blessed. Yet beneath the dazzling canopy of this wealth, a cancerous rot took hold. The air became thick not with perfume, but with the silent scream of the victimized. Their defiant noise rose higher than the city spires until the grievance against them was finally heard, piercing the very floor of heaven. And from that height, the Almighty prepared to answer, not with the tramp of foreign armies or the rising of a great flood, but with a judgment of pure celestial fire. This is more than a chronicle of ruin. It is a spiritual calculus of consequence and grace. It is the absolute demarcation between the shadow of human wickedness and the brilliance of the divine right. Before the inferno consumed everything, before the air itself became sulfur and flame, the Eternal paused. He remembered the simple faith of one man, Abraham, and in that covenant of memory, a single door was opened. This family was ripped from the coming devastation. The saga proves that though the wages of sin are universal, the refuge of God's compassion is reserved for those who hold fast to His name. In the dawn of civilization, the twin crowns of the plain, Sodom and Gomorrah, flourished beside the rich tributaries of the Jordan. They gleamed, fat with fertility, an unparalleled vision of Eden regained. Merchants and chieftains spoke in hushed tones of their lavish excess and abundant provision. But prosperity was their ruin. The luxury birthed arrogance, and the abundance extinguished all fear of the sacred. The citizens turned inward, their hands closing tight around their possessions, rejecting the concepts of balance and equity. Their avenues, once lined with bounty, now rang with the sound of contemptuous laughter. Pride became their philosophy. Brutality was their sport. They turned their backs on the beggar. They mocked the desperate plea of the orphaned and celebrated their most abhorrent acts as the highest form of personal sovereignty. A prophet from a distant age would later summarize their fatal error. They were bloated with comfort, yet utterly indifferent to the cry of the poor and the weak. They committed abominations in my sight, and so their destruction was sealed. The unbearable weight of this wickedness finally forced a response from the Creator. On a sweltering afternoon, far away in the oak groves of Mamre, Abraham rested near his tent flap. Raising his gaze from the dust, he saw 3 figures standing by the sun-baked path. They were radiant, their presence casting an impossible coolness onto the scorched earth. He instantly recognized the gravity of their arrival. These were no dust-covered pilgrims. They were envoys from the throne room, and one among them held the unmistakable majesty of the Lord Himself in human form. Abraham scrambled to his feet, abandoning dignity, running to kneel low before them. "My lords," he pleaded, his voice thick with reverence, "do not pass by the shelter of your servant. Let the journey's grime be washed from your feet and find cool rest beneath the deep shadow of this tree. Allow me to bring a morsel of sustenance, that your souls may be strengthened before you resume your essential journey." The 3 accepted the offering. Abraham raced into his camp, commanding his household to prepare a hurried feast: the finest bread, the richest curds, the most tender calf. He waited on them, standing in respectful silence, witnessing the sacred act of the divine breaking bread on human ground. After they had finished, the figure of the Lord turned toward the distant, unseen city. A lamentation has arisen from the valley floor. The clamor against Sodom and Gomorrah is deafening, and their transgression is grievous indeed. I descend now to see if the deed matches the report. The truth must be verified. The two angelic messengers proceeded toward the plain, but Abraham remained, fixed beneath the sky, a man caught between his human loyalty and his divine knowledge. In an act of supreme spiritual audacity, a move permitted only by profound intimacy with God, Abraham dared to approach. He stepped closer to the consuming fire of the Lord's presence. "Will the judge of the whole earth," he whispered, his frame trembling yet steady, "sweep the innocent into the same ruin as the depraved? If the city holds 50 souls whose hearts are clean, will you allow the entire place to perish?" The Lord replied, "For the sake of those 50 righteous, the hand of destruction will be stayed." Abraham felt the air shift, a grace granted. He pressed further, testing the boundary of compassion. "Pardon my boldness, my Lord. What if 5 of the 50 are missing? If only 45 are found? I will not lay waste to it for the 45. The plea continued, a descending stair of hope. 40, 30, 20. The answer was always the same. For their sake, I will relent. Finally, Abraham dared one last petition, the sound barely leaving his lips. "Let me speak only one final time. If 10 faithful are found there?" The final promise came, "Even for 10 I will withhold the storm." Abraham could ask no more. The Lord's presence lifted, and the patriarch returned to his dwelling, a crushing question hanging over him. Were there even 10? The sun began its final, slow descent. Under the deepening violet sky, the two celestial agents arrived at the brazen gates of Sodom. Seated at the very entry point, performing the duties of the gate, was Lot, Abraham's nephew. He had settled here years prior, drawn by the plain's irresistible promise of prosperity, willingly blind to the moral filth that stained its gold. Recognizing the traveler's noble bearing, Lot immediately rose and bowed low, his heart hammering with a specific dread. "Sirs," he urged, "I implore you, turn your steps to my house. You must spend the dark hours there, wash your weary feet, and find safety. You may depart at first light." The messengers offered a polite refusal, intending to sleep in the open square. Lot, however, knew the square's true appetite after sundown. He insisted with a desperate urgency, knowing the streets were a hunting ground for innocents. Eventually they yielded, and he ushered them inside, securing the door and prepared what he could. But before the night had truly settled, a sickening chorus began outside. The men of the city, old men and boys, drawn from every district, had surrounded the dwelling. They hammered against the thick wood, their voices a single ravenous shout. "Where are the strangers you harbor tonight? Send them out! We must know them!" It was a declaration of malice, a violent vow to humiliate and defile these outsiders. Lot, panicked, burst through the door and pulled it shut behind him, standing alone against the mass of his neighbors. "My brothers," he begged, sweat slicking his face, "I beg you, do not commit this horrific wickedness." Then, in a devastating instant that exposed the depth of the city's moral infection upon his own soul, Lot made a tragic offer. "I have 2 daughters who have not yet known a man. I will bring them out to you. Do with them whatever your twisted hearts desire, but leave these men beneath my roof untouched. They are under the sacred trust of my shadow." The crowd did not soften. Instead, they grew incandescent with rage. "Away, foreigner! You came here to profit, and now you appoint yourself our conscience? We will visit upon you a judgment worse than theirs." They surged, pressing Lot against the door, their hands reaching to smash the barrier. Just as the wood began to splinter, the hands of the angel shot out from inside, seizing Lot and yanking him back into the safety of the house. The bolts slammed shut. Through the door, a sudden, searing light burst forth. The savage mob was instantly blinded, their sight dissolving into a thick black nothingness. Panic erupted as the men clawed the air, staggering, unable to find the door they had almost broken, reduced to sightless, screaming confusion. Lot stumbled, staring at his guests, the reality of their power shattering his compromised world. The angels turned to him, their faces grim. "Do you have anyone else tied to this doomed place? Sons-in-law, sons, daughters? Rouse them now. We are here to execute the decree. The cry against this city has finalized the verdict." Lot raced into the streets to find the men who were pledged to marry his daughters. "Run!" he cried, his voice frantic. "The Lord is bringing down the fire. Flee this instant!" But the men met his terror with cold amusement. The concept of an offended God seemed a pathetic fable in the face of their city's untouchable might. They laughed, dismissing him as a hysterical fool.
Outside the walls, the angel's voice cut the morning air. "Run! Run for your very breath! Do not look back toward the plain, and do not pause until the mountains receive you." Lot, overwhelmed and broken, pleaded for a closer refuge. "My lord, I cannot make the heights. Let me turn to that small settlement, Zoar. It is tiny. Let me find safety there." The celestial being relented. "Go then. I swear by my commission, the destruction will wait for you, but you must hurry. I can do nothing until your foot is safe within that town." The instant Lot's family crossed the threshold of Zoar, the sky cracked open. Just as the sun burst over the peaks, the heavens answered the outcry. From the endless blue, the Lord unleashed a furious deluge of sulfurous fire, raining down upon Sodom and Gomorrah. The world became a single searing furnace. The soil ruptured, spewing ash and smoke. Homes vaporized. Every life, every plant, every sign of the civilization built on corruption was instantly consumed and converted to black dust. But as they fled toward the tiny town, Lot's wife broke the divine command. Her neck craned back, her gaze fixed upon the incandescent pillar of fire that had been her home. In that single, rebellious moment of sorrow and longing for the life she had lost, the judgment touched her. Her skin grew instantly rigid, a pale crystalline shell forming over her face. Her limbs stiffened, her feet rooting themselves to the smoking earth. She was not consumed by fire, but by the weight of her own lingering desire. She became a blinding monument of white salt, a stark, silent warning that salvation demands a complete departure of the heart. The survivors retreated into the silent desolation of the mountains, finding refuge in a hollowed cave. Those saved from the fire, the stain of Sodom's immorality clung to them. The daughters, seeing no future outside their isolated stone prison, perpetuated a sad, twisted act to ensure their line continued, bearing sons to their father. These sons would found the nations of Moab and Ammon, lineages born in sin, destined to stand in perpetual opposition to God's chosen people. The shadow of these twin cities has stretched across every century. They are the eternal symbol of divine reckoning, not for one single vice, but for a whole cloth of spiritual disease. The carelessness of wealth, the cruelty of pride, the perversion of freedom, and the absolute disregard for God and neighbor. Judgment did not come rashly. Heaven watched. Heaven waited. Mercy pleaded until it had no more ground to cover. Only when the last possibility of repentance had withered and the cry of the oppressed demanded justice did the sulfur fall. This is a testament to perfect justice, which pauses for the sake of mercy, yet refuses to be mocked forever. We look upon our modern world, at metropolises of unprecedented wonder and wealth, yet see the familiar pulse of arrogance, entitlement, and moral fluidity. We see societies, even those once rooted in sacred values, now embracing the very sins that defined the plain. Every day, the defiant parade of profanity, the celebration of greed, the turning away from the vulnerable echoes the fatal soundtrack of Sodom. Many walk the broad avenues of popular opinion, convinced that consequence is a myth and that the moral tide they ride is progress. But the Scripture stands as a pillar of salt against this illusion. Righteousness lifts a people. Sin is their inescapable shame. Even now, the way to salvation remains open. The God who judges is the God who saves. His love is vast, his anger slow, but he will not leave the wicked unaddressed. The fire was not merely an ending. It was a profound, timeless sermon, calling all people, all nations, to turn from the wide, crowded road of self-indulgence and seek refuge. In a world chasing the fleeting shadows of Sodom's liberty, following the path of Christ will feel like isolation, an archaic resistance. But remember, the end of that crowd, they led one another to the ash heap. We are called to step onto the path that narrows, the gate that few find, to refuse the majority's pull, to live differently, and to shine as lights against the gathering darkness. The narrow way is hard, but it is the only way that leads to life eternal.